Welcome to C100 Global Wisdom Talks, the podcast where we explore transformative ideas and practical strategies for entrepreneurial families navigating the complex worlds of family wealth, family offices, and governance. Danny Kurtesh and Jan Petka are your guides on this journey as we uncover insights from the world's most brilliant minds and thought leaders shaping the future of intergenerational success. Before we dive in, let me introduce C100 Global, a peer network for entrepreneurial families and families of wealth. Our mission is to empower families to build meaningful legacies and become thriving 100-year families through a focus on dynamics, governance, and strategic collaboration. And now, let's start our conversation.
Hello, everyone. The next episode of our C100 Global Wisdom Talk. And today, it's my distinct pleasure and my honor that we have Dennis Jaffe on our talk. And it is also for me personally in a great honor because, Dennis, your book was the great inspiration for my family to start my own 100-year family project. So I'm looking very much forward to in great discussion today. And Danny, now the ball to you, and then we will start.
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Danny Curtis. We're here again for a great talk, this time with Dennis Jaffe, many people don't know Dennis Jaffe here in Europe. So my first question goes out to you, Dennis. Could you give us a brief background about yourself and the great things that you've done already in this field of family wealth?
Well, the field of family wealth, the way it is today, really didn't really exist before the late 70s and early 80s. So a group of people got together in the U.S. and there was no research on family enterprise. There was people knew what a family business was, but nobody had really looked at it. And as a matter of fact, when they thought about family business, they would say, well, family businesses are kind of like not grown up real businesses. They're immature, they're irrational, they're personal, and that's not what a business should be. Business should be rational and organized and not have emotional dynamics. So a group of people got together and said, wait a minute, family businesses are the essence of society everywhere in the world. How could we not be studying them and learning about what's special? So a group of people got together and started basically to say, how do we do research? How do we study? And this grew in very quickly, was picked up in Europe, and groups like the Family Business Network started, and family groups began to get together, and researchers began to look at family businesses as a unique kind of entity. And so I got involved. I was a professor, and I worked with organizational change and mergers and strategy and things like that. And I really saw, wow, family businesses are really interesting. And so I began to work, and in the past, I've really worked with and seen the research grow from kind of a small number of people to now encompassing every part of the world. And there are family business centers in every continent and every country. And they're looking at the challenges of people that want to combine a family and a business. So I've been involved. And around the turn of the 21st century, I made a very good career move. I retired, and I retired as a professor, which meant I had a lot of open time. And so what I wanted to do was to look at some of the things that had grown up in the U.S. and say, well, gee, do these ideas fit in Europe? Do they fit in Asia? Do they fit, are they just U.S. kinds of things? And I began to travel and work more globally. So I worked with Family Business Network, and I was their advisor for their Asia Pacific chapter. And I worked in Australia and I spent time in Europe, and began to do research on global family enterprises, and particularly the kind of research that I do. I don't do statistical research. I do research by interviewing and visiting families. I'm kind of just sociologist, and my idea of how you study a business is to go and talk to the people that are doing it and ask them. So I began a project when I retired, sponsored by Family Business Network and the Family Office Exchange, looking at family businesses that were successful over more than 3 generations. So my research was I wanted to look at the best families, not the average family, and not not do a survey of what families were doing, but what were the best families doing, and the challenge was, how do I define what's the best families, and in a way that we can recognize them. And I began to look at families that were past the 3rd generation, because that's kind of a miracle in a way to get that into the 3rd generation, and the founder is largely gone, and the family has really evolved. And I was looking at families that were highly successful, not just as one business, but more and more as a set of enterprises and businesses and assets, and then that had also kept together as a family. Because the if you're a bunch of investors who happen to be related, but you're not together as a family, I would argue you're not a family business. You're a business with relatives that are investors, but you aren't really working as a family. So with those criteria, I started traveling around the world, and I interviewed families from 20 countries, 100 families all over the world that were past the 3rd generation. And I interviewed people from older and younger generations, however they define them, and I asked them what they were doing, and more importantly, how they came to be who they were in the 3rd generation. What did they begin to do that brought them there? And the book that I wrote, that you came to, borrowed from your grandchildren, talks about tells the stories of these 100 families. That's why it's so thick, because there's a lot of stories in it, and there's no one way. There's really a lot of different things that families did that I wanted to share, and the idea was to fill the book with stories of successful families. There isn't one way. So I've been doing that. I write a column for Family Business Magazine for several years. I wrote for Forbes. I've done papers. I write for all kinds of different journals and things like that. And basically, my role now is as an educator for families, and also for advisors who work with families to help them work in a positive way with evolving families.
Thank you very much.
100.
Thank you very much, Dennis. I have a follow-up, because this leads actually into, I guess, Jan's questions afterwards. You mentioned the beginning of this part of research from the side of family business. I mean, if you take the word family business or family enterprise or family wealth, usually the studies that were around at that time were focused on the business side, or on the wealth side, or on the enterprise side, but rarely on the family side.
Right.
How come that you were like one of the first, if not the first, to dwell into the family side, which is often, being, bit left out?
These are things that are happen, because of circumstances. So the group got together, that initially got together, contained family therapists, which is what I am by background, organizational, practitioners, organizational change practitioners, lawyers, and accountants, and it was a blend of those different disciplines. But the groups that took up the work most immediately were business schools. And so business schools are not going to do family studies. They're studying the business. And so they're studying the family in relation to the business. So a lot of business school research is looking at the family as a quality of a business, not the family itself. And so they're really the short answer is that there are people that are working with families and coaching families, and it's a tremendously important area, but it doesn't really have a home. Financial advisors are interested, but they're interested in managing the money, not the family. And so there are these different groups managing the business, managing the money. There's no group that really just works with the families. There are some organizations that do, but families they don't have a home, so it's been hard to study the family. But a lot of people are beginning to do it, and people in financial institutions and increasingly in business schools and networks are beginning to say, wait a minute, this is important. We need to understand family dynamics, and who you are as a family is sometimes because you grew up in your family. It's more important, your family relationships. You can't just say, well, we're in a business now. I'm erasing 30 years of fighting with my siblings or fighting with my parents or kind of differences. I'm just going to erase those and just be a business. No, your family relations are with you all the time. And the best families don't pretend they're not there. The best families say, hey, we're going to work with this and we're going to be honest about it. But we have to manage our differences and learn to work with each other. We can't just make it happen and pretend we're just fine.
That's great. So, Dennis, what I can tell you is just that I have a learning time each day, and that's my lunchtime, right? And I'm sitting in a little cafe around the corner, and the learning time, I pick up your book between 2 and 3 times per week, and I sit down and read. So, my main question is, what is actually the core essence of your book, if you talk about, or in other words, what distinguish the best of the best families around the world from the whole crowd? What are, let's say, the main patterns, what they are using to thrive and to flourish over generations?
Well, let's first of all go. There's a big divide that I saw, and they're the first. Most families, just by number, are moving from the first to the second generation, and so there is a kind of a best practice and characteristics of the families we're moving from the first to the second generation. Then there are families that become family enterprises and work together over into the second, third, and fourth generation. And there isn't one thing. People say, what's the thing? But look at your life, and you see it's made up of many influences. And if I was to say, well, Jan, tell me what is the most important thing that makes you who you are?
Yeah.
You'd say, well, there's a lot of things, and they're all important. And it's the same with families. There's a lot of things that are important. Certainly economic factors, social factors, but there are also things that were very clear about families that these families did, some of which are a little bit surprising. Like in the first, let me give you an example of a big learning.
Please.
That I didn't expect.
Yeah.
So the asking these families, so I have all these families that were in the third, fourth generation, and I said, well, go back to when you were in the first generation, moving into the second generation. What was it that happened? What were the things? And there was one thing that many, maybe most of these families talked about, which is that there was a big transition from the first to second generation. And let me explain that. because I think it's very important. First generation, they're not a family business. If you start a business and you build it up into a great successful business, that's not a family business. You're an entrepreneur, and you may intend to involve your children and pass it on to the next generation, but you are basically an entrepreneurial founder-led business, and you are in charge.
Yeah.
You don't have to answer to anybody. No board. You can't be fired. You're the owner. It's like you are the king, and that's the way it is. So now your kids are in a different situation. For example, even if you select one kid to be the next leader, he or she, mostly it's he, is not going to be a leader the way you are, because your kids have siblings. And if you're a sister or brother of somebody who's running the business, you're also their sister or brother. And you probably expect some ownership or some benefit from the company. So the second and third generation are groups of people. The first generation is just a solo operator. And so there's what we call a culture shift. And the family shifts from being one person operation to now having several people, and they have different roles. Some are owners that have responsibility. Some are board members. There's non-family members that are in the business. All of a sudden, what started as one person's show is now several people, and they have to learn to be a team. Not everybody is equal. People have different roles, and they have to learn what the roles are. And so there's what we call a culture shift from one person to a team. And the families reported that the way their ability to kind of manage that shift from first to second generation, from one person to a team, is a major culture change. And here's another thing that's really interesting about it is the founder is a very, very wise person, is a very good business person, has all kinds of talent, all kinds of capability, but they are not a team player. They do not understand the team. So, for example, I was just with a family, and the entrepreneur is a great entrepreneur, and he has three sons, and the three sons are co-presidents and are together running a giant business that he ran by himself. And he listens to the three sons, and they argue and they talk and they meet, and he's just saying all the time, I'm getting impatient. Why can't you just decide? Why can't you just do these things? Why do you have to talk about it? And they say, well, we're three people, and we're all different, and we have different views and different situations. So we have a lot that we have to talk about. And the father is just scratches his head and say, well, he gets really frustrated. And this is the challenge. So he doesn't know what it's like to have three co-presidents. He can't even imagine more than one person. So the founder is not a good resource for this transition. And so the families that are successful have to be respectful of the founder, and sometimes he's the main decision maker and has all the power, but they have to bring in new ideas for how to organize themselves. And so the big shift from first to second generation is that the family had to shift to a shared governance, shared decision making, sharing of ideas, sharing of decisions, sharing of the work that they did, and they had to take on roles that were much more complicated than the founders. So this is the culture change from first to second, third generation, where you go from being wanna be a family business to now we are a family business. And this is the big change in family business, and it's not one that's started by or done very well by the founder, even though he wants it to happen. It's really done by the next generation who organize a structure. And we don't recognize very well that the second generation really has to work very hard to develop the structure for a community of people, and to make it work, to cooperate, to respect each other, to avoid, to know how to face conflict and not be destroyed by it, to separate roles, create leadership roles. All kinds of things happen in the second and third generations that the founder had no idea about. So that is, if there is a number one thing, that is the number one shift from first to second generation is the culture change.
Can I ask you at this point, Dennis? You talk in your book about the term tribe, right? Or in some elements also a family by choice, right? Can you give me just an idea in which generation was this decision made? Was it just in the second generation or in the third generation to come together as a tribe?
Well, it isn't a conscious decision. Here's what happened. So this is part of the transition I was talking about. So the family goes from one person, and then group of next generation grow up in the same household. So when I started doing my research, here's how I learned that there was a difference. As I asked the first interview I was doing, I asked the person, "Well, tell me about your family." And the response that I got was, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean? Your family. Tell me about your family." And this was a third generation family with about 30, 40 people. And the person I was interviewing said, "Well, you don't understand that there are different families. For example, if you're saying my family, my wife and my kids, that's my family in one sense, but I also have cousins, and my cousins live all over the world, and they're important to me, but they're not the same as my immediate family." So I had to decide that there had to be two words. The word family didn't do it. So I changed, and I start calling the immediate family the household, group of people that share a house and a common upbringing. That's your household. But then there's the extended family. And so the extended family, now here, let's look at it. So it's not one family. And this is how cultures grow up. I'm an anthropologist, sociologist by background. This is how cultures form. So a group of people get together and they reproduce and they form different families. And every family brings in an outside person. So every time when you're three siblings, you each get married. So that means three people come into the family that are not blood family members.
Yes.
And they create children. So now you've got three families, and then the next generation you may have 9 families. So now, and these families, like a tribe, is a group of families that work together and cooperate as an economic unit and as a defense to keep them safe, to create a community, to do things together and help each other. So this is what we call a tribe when you get to the third generation, and it's a tribe is usually lives in one place, whereas the family enterprise, it gets really complicated because people live in different places and they're still connected, but it's hard. You don't. They're just not. They don't see each other every day. So I started calling the extended family a tribe because they're really a community of related people that have something in common that they want to do, and they have to work very hard to create it. It doesn't happen naturally. So that's why I call them tribes. I think that's a better term than just saying family, because then you're confused. Is this the extended family? Is this the household? So, I mean, there's a lot of problems in family business in terminology, and we have to be really precise about what we mean. So the family is when you're third, fourth generation family. That's not a good word. You have maybe 30, 40. Some families had 100 different households, and they were in different countries and different places, and they had a lot of different assets, and sometimes they owned different companies and real estate and investments and family office, and they got pretty complicated. And so I needed to use more precise terminology. So I started using the idea of the tribe, extended family, and that's what they are. You have to think that you're not a family. You can get together. If you have 200 family members, you're not close to everybody, but they're all family and they have a common heritage. But if you want to be together as a family enterprise, you have to get to know them. And that means the 200 people in the family have to spend time together and they have to do something together. And they can't just say, well, I've got, 10 shares I've got shares of this business. Some people, by the third generation, for example, have less ownership and more ownership. Like a family that, depending on how many children you have, if you have two siblings and one has five children and one has one child, then the one with the one child is going to be own five times as much as his cousins, and so ownership gets shared. So the challenge of these families is that they have to now work with differences. So the other thing you asked about was the family of choice, and this is something again that I didn't think about or expect, and I studied 100 families, and every one of those families, because of this thing that people inherit different amounts. Some people, for example, one brother can say, well, I want to buy out my brother or my sister. I have a sister who's not interested in the business, and my brother and I are really interested in it, so we'll buy out our sister. But there's still some family real estate or family investments that we share together. So ownership becomes really variable in the family.
Yeah.
And so so what happens is there are some family members by the third generation that have very little ownership, and they don't really relate to the family. For example, one big family had giant real estate company in a big city in the U.S., and so they were well known. One of the family members moved out to the other side of the country, and he said, "Well, I love the fact that we're all invested in the city, but I don't live there anymore, and I want to have be a rancher in this rural area, and so I want you to buy me out. So I want you to basically pay me for my stock. I won't be an owner, but I'll start my own business out in ranch land, and I want to be an entrepreneur." So he basically, left the family business, but he's still a family member. And so what I found was very interesting. But by the third generation, the families in my study, 97 out of 100 of them had some policy, had family members that had left the family enterprise. So almost everyone had somebody in the family who said, "I don't want to be your partner. I'm your family. I'll always be your family, but I don't want to be a partner. I want my own business. I want my own money. I want to run it myself. I don't want to work with you because I don't like it, or I don't relate to it, or I want to run something else or do something else or whatever." So every family becomes what my colleague Jay Hughes calls a family of affinity. It's not all the blood family members. Some people leave, and this is a good thing because the people that leave are people that say, "Well, I'm not sure about this, and I don't really agree with it, and I want to do something else." And so rather than have them be prisoners and stay in the business and kind of argue all the time. And there are some businesses, family businesses, that are like that. People that argue every day of their lives and they still stay together. Bah, I don't know why, but they do. They can't separate. And other families say, "Hey, we don't get along. Let's sell the business to one of us." Or sometimes they divide the business and they have two businesses or something like that. And they say, "Let's separate. You run your business, I'll run my business. You go your way, I'll go mine. We'll be brothers, and we can have a great time together as long as we're not partners." So this process of basically letting the family members who don't want to be part of the thing be free is a really big part of evolving family business. And sometimes a whole family branch will leave. Sometimes an individual who doesn't want to work with the family will leave. Sometimes people that want to take risks and grow the business will buy the business, and the people that want to have a safer, less risky kind of life or more predictable life will invest in other things. And there's a way in which the family differentiates.
That's
So
true.
those are some of the things
Yeah.
that I found. Again, that by looking at whole families, these are some of the milestones that I found that were not predictable or just totally expected.
I want to take these important thoughts that you just shared with us with something you said in earlier on, the shift from G1 to G2.
Uh-huh.
Already there. I mean, and I know many of our listeners, or there are certain names that pop up in my mind that will tell me I have to ask this question now because they're interested in this. How do you bring G1 into the room, to a table, to discuss with G2, the second generation, the next generation, the transition of decision making, becoming from a monarchy to a senate, if you want.
Well, this is where there's no good way, but this is where. So I'm an elder, and so I'm now old enough to talk to these people as I'm a grandparent. I have grown grandchildren, so you have to talk about what is it you want to happen, and they want their kids to be responsible, and they say, well, how is that going to happen? And if you think about it, some people say, well, I don't want to talk to the kids, or I don't want them to inherit ownership, or I don't want them to have control. And you say, how does that help create a next generation? How is that helping them? And you begin to look at the fears that the first generation has and say, we're not talking about giving away control to the next generation, but I believe that every family has to sit down and say, what do we want in the next generation? They have to have a conversation about the future, and they have to say, what are we going to do? If you're a next generation person and you're in college, you're saying, well, gee, my family wants me to be entrepreneurial. Can I use the family money to invest? My family wants me to do something useful. Can I use the family money to go to medical school, to become a researcher? Family says we want to be good citizens. Can we use the family money to make a difference in the world? Are we going to work together to make the world a better place? So there's a lot of questions. Is the family going to help me? Do I have to earn my own living? What's the expectations? What do we want? What am I responsible for? What does the family expect of me? And so the family has to have a conversation about the future of wealth and come up with some kind of an agreement about what's going to happen in the second and third generation. What are we going to do with the wealth we have? It's like the question is, family is really wealthy. Let's say the family has $1 billion corporation. The father started it. He maybe his maybe his spouse was part of it also, but basically he has $1 billion company. Is it the family's money? Children can feel like it's not their money. People can feel like they're really a part of it. People can feel like they're confused. They can feel guilty. They can feel like it's not fair. They can feel confused. They can feel scared that it'll be taken away from them. There's a whole lot of responses, and the family can't pretend that they're not there. So I believe that secrecy is like tooth decay. Secrecy is something that gets worse and worse. The more you try to keep it secret and keep it apart, the more bad things happen. And so families have to have transparency and share, and begin to say, well, the older generation is not going to last forever. How are decisions going to be made in the next generation? What decisions are made by everybody? What decisions are made by business leaders? What decisions are made as family decisions? How are people that marry in the family? These are the things that the next generation has to decide, and that's what we call governance. Governance is all of the decisions we have to make in the next generation to divide up the roles and to make it clear how the family operates when it's not a one man show.
So
Now, Jan, you're on. You want to take over?
so Dennis, if we take just the flip side of the coin, is just the question. Just two questions. What I have. The one question is structure-wise. What kind of structures have these families found that they can evolve and also thrive and flourish over generation? That's number one. And number two is just for my own interest. Do you have found that these kind of families have just these personnes de confiance to support these families just on the sideline on these transitions from one generation to another, or also the let's say the principal and the spouses to come to a great decision for all of these family members?
Well, let's take a question one by one. So the first question is what kind of governance do they build up? And again, there's 200 pages of the book about the different things that they decide. But at a basic level, what happens in a family business that's different and doesn't take place in other businesses is that the family has two kinds of governance that split, two types of decisions. And one is the business financial decisions. There's the owners, and the owners have responsibilities. They have to say, do we want to grow the business? Are we distributing money? What are our goals? What kind of business do we want? Who do we want to lead it? So there are owner decisions, and they create a board of directors and managers, and they can be not family members. So that's business governance. But then the family also they have people that marry in, they have people that are young, that are growing, and the family has things that they want to do. They want to have fun together. They often have a family home, a family place to go. They often take vacations together. They have meetings. Most of these families have like an annual family meeting where they get together and they do educational programs. They talk about the next generation. They do philanthropy. And these are all non-financial and non-business activities. So the family has family governance that's non-financial, personal, relationship things that they do. And those are different leaders than the business leaders. So families, what I talk about is they have two pillars. They have family governance and a business financial governance. And these two entities often have different people, different groups, running them, and they have to be cooperative and work together in certain areas, but each one is separate. So we have a family governance evolution and a non and a business financial governance, and these take different paths, and they have different people, and so the family gets pretty complicated. Um, Now, the second question you're asking is about what was it? What was the second?
It's
The question about the person de confiance, someone
Right.
that
So
is
that
helping the family the transition to do this transition.
so here's the thing. So a person de confiance was first talked about by Jay Hughes, who you interviewed, and he talks about as about being somebody that is a basically a confidant, an advisor to the family. Now, what I see is that this is again a complicated term, and sometimes the idea person de confiance is the person that advises the older family member for 30 or 40 years, somebody who went to college, university with them, who is a friend, who is a lawyer, who is somebody who's been involved. And this person is advising their friend, not the whole family. They care about the family and they think about the family, but they're not really an advisor to the family members. They may be they may be there, they may be present, but they're not. So the idea is the advisor to the family is something that a person that has to begin to shift from being the advisor to the elder founder to being the advisor of the whole business, which means they have to build not just personal relationship, but they have to bring the family together to have meetings, to work together to build governance. And these are and my the challenge is that the family often finds that the original advisor, long-term advisor, is not person who really is knowledgeable about governance in the next generation, and they don't have the trust of the children and the spouses and the women and so there has to be a change, and one person can't that's been the person de confiance, the advisor for 40 years may not be they may be getting old like the founder, and there needs to be a succession
yeah,
process in the advisor community that offers them, a path to change and to adapt a new kind of governance. So
great.
it's got to that's got to change along with the family, or the family is not going to have the right advisor.
How is it? I mean, since the generations are changing, and it's at least in the Western world, the individualization of every family member is important. How do you keep the family together? How do you keep this thought of being together and keeping, as you said, the tribe also together, not just the immediate household?
It's very, very difficult. And this is why people like me and like you have a lot of work to do. So there's nothing magic, but first of all, some of the older generation, they don't want to change and they don't want to listen, and they want to continue their role until they die. And basically, they don't want to listen and they don't want to share, and they don't. This is a problem because um, you can't just make them share because they're the boss. They own it. So now families do um, have some impact on them by, for example, saying, getting together and saying, we want to have a conversation. One story that I often tell is this one is a family, a very, very large family, had a patriarch that didn't want to change, didn't want to have family conversations. And so he had 7 children, and they met and they with their advisor, and they said they and the advisor said you should have family meetings, talk about this, and they said, well, our father doesn't want us to, And the advisor said, "Well, how old are you?" And they're 50. They have grown children. And say, so what is it that your father is that you can't get together and talk about the future? The seven siblings and your families, you can't get together. I said, "Oh yeah, well he'll be very upset." Well, yeah, but you can do it. And so they said, "Well, we're going to start meeting." And the father, after a couple of months, they started meeting, and the father said, "Well, you guys meeting?" I said, "Yeah, we're having a good time." And the father, we're not talking about you stepping down, even though you're 88. um, we're talking about the future. And he said, "Oh, how is that?" And I said, "Oh, it's really good. We have wonderful meetings." And the father then said, "Well, can I come?" And he started attending, and he had a wonderful time. But it wasn't his. What I said to them when they started is what they said is that this isn't. It's not. Your father doesn't have a problem. He's fine. It's
That's true.
you that have a problem. You are 50-year-old people, and you feel like you can't talk together and make decisions and figure out the future, and you are basically limiting yourselves, and you need to be working. So until they took control and found out, yeah, we can have meetings. Father is owns the business, but he doesn't tell us what to do. He does, but we don't have to listen. And so this was an example of how change happened from the second generation, and the older generation didn't want it to happen, but when it did happen, it it worked, and it changed the family.
So, Dennis, we come to our final round. So, first of all, it is just a great pleasure to hear your wisdom and also from your research. And my final question for today will be: let's make an outlook. There is undoubtedly, we will see over the next decade and also over the next 100 years, more and more families will become wealthy. Or let's make it, let's they become rich.
Yeah.
So, and also undoubtedly, we will live longer, right? So 100 years, I mean, probably if you are in good health, it will be that you will become 100 years. So what does it mean actually from your perspective if we can take a look into the future? Do we need more families that they have access also to your knowledge, but come also to this decision? Let's figure out how we become just the 100-year family enterprise.
Well, first of all, the yes, you have to be looking. There's more people. So, for example, it isn't a two-generational thing anymore with 100-year lifespans. It's a three-generation or more family. There's three adult generations, and they have to work together. So that makes three-dimensional chess rather than two-dimensional chess. It's very challenging, and there are a lot of roles to fill, and people have to be in and out and moving and changing. And the other thing is the uncertainty is great. You can't. People talk about seventh generation thinking, but look at the world, and right now it's changing every day. It's shifting radically. So you can't plan anything. If you had a year ago planned for now, you would have no idea of what was actually going to happen. So the idea is you have to be planning with uncertainty, and that means that people have to be course correcting and rethinking their plans. And that means that they have to be in touch with each other. They have to be gathering information. They have to be watching for changes, and they have to be cooperating and creating, making good decisions about when to change, when to sell the business, when to invest in other things, when to distribute money, when to how to have impact. What do family want to support? So there's a lot of engagement, and what I would say to families is they have to get together and they have to have a lot of meetings and they have to really work together and spend time making decisions and working if they want to have a family enterprise. And if they don't, they can sell it and distribute the money and everybody go their own way, because creating a family enterprise that works is a lot of work. And you can't hire somebody to do that. You can hire
Thank
someone
you.
else, but you can't hire someone to do it for you.
Yeah, you have to do it yourself. You have to work a lot.
Right.
Thank you very much, Dennis, for sharing your time, for sharing your expertise. It was an immense pleasure for us to talk to you, and I hope we can do that again.
Well, thank you. You're doing a great thing by bringing this community together to talk about these issues, and I wish you well.
Thank you very much, Dennis.
Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to C100 Global Wisdom Talks. If you found today's conversation valuable, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might benefit. For more resources and insights, visit www.cu100global.com.